Hi, I'm Jennifer Carter, and thank you for joining me on a podcast for parents, teachers, and administrators. Today's conversation should be a good one, and I'm sure it's something on your mind. So let's get to it. All right, so thank you so much, Sarah. This is our part 2 because part 1 did not record. I told you I'm still figuring out my technology, and that is full disclosure. I'm really tech savvy, but not that tech savvy. So I need for you to reintroduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Wright. I'm the director of Inclusivity at a pre-K-12 independent school in Colorado, and I'm super excited to be here again for part 2.
Excellent. So what do you think we should talk about today?
So I was thinking that we could start with a little blog post that I had wrote, because it is really what got me thinking about girls and their experiences in independent schools. So I'll start with that.
Okay.
And so I had titled it, "My Child Isn't Shy, She's in Culture Shock." So that was kind of an intro of what has really, I guess, been my journey on how I could do better by Black girls in independent schools, thinking about what was happening with my own child, who was beloved by all her teachers. I would say, like, every teacher she had is like, oh my gosh, I love Mila. But as a parent watching her, I just felt like, you don't even get to see her. like you don't even know Mila. Like, Mila hasn't even really shown up in school yet. So yeah.
Did you engage her teachers in conversations about ways to see her?
I did, like, starting in third grade, like once we really started narrowing it down and she started advocating a little bit more towards the end of second grade, what was going on. I think it also taught me that it was okay to self-advocate for my child. I think just like growing up in my community, we just like go with the flow, like, oh, whatever teacher they place them with, the school must knows best. And for the most part, I think schools are always doing the best they can in terms of placement and friendships. But I found that I had to be a lot more like concrete and direct with the principals. Like, no, I want her to have this teacher. And sometimes I was really frank, like with her. The teacher she had for fourth grade was her first Black teacher. And I was just like, no, she needs this teacher because she's Black. I get it. Like, there might be someone else that can help her academically. I was like, but I just feel like at this point in her development, she needs someone that she can like visibly connect with. And then getting her to advocate more too. Like, it's okay to tell people you don't want them to touch your hair, or it's so okay to talk to your teacher when you feel like someone says something that doesn't really sit right with you, or telling the teacher, like, it's okay to make mistakes, but please try to read a different kind of book. like all of those things are okay. So that's been, I think I've learned with her that as a parent, like, we really have to advocate for our children. And as a parent, it's okay if, with me working in schools, if a school is a good fit for me, but not a good fit for her.
I think it's interesting we're talking about her showing up at school, but I think if it feels almost like this is kind of like a conversation about advocating for your child and knowing when to hit the gas and when to pump the brakes, because, you know, we all have like mama bears and tiger moms and helicopter parents, and we don't want to be that. But at the same time, you know, if you think that it's something that's fixable, you know, how do you balance that? You know, and especially as an administrator, you can kind of see it from both sides, where people want their kids to have a good experience, but at the same time, you want parents to understand there's a boundary for them also. Because I think sometimes parents forget we have boundaries when it comes to our expectations of the school. Similarly, you know, we have rights, you know, when kids are at school. So how do you help people navigate that? And how do you navigate that as a parent?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I really got from my experience as a parent was that it's okay to treat your kid's school in the same way that you might treat your job. And so I think of it as like with our jobs or interpersonal relationships, we do have very clear boundaries, and we're very aware of how things are impacting us. And there are some times where, like, you know, you can't just quit your job. You have to like look for something else. But if there's something that you feel like, you know, this is hurting me more than helping me, then that's usually when, like, if we're at a job, for example, we start applying for other positions to see if we can like have a new manager, or maybe we need to be in a different division, or maybe we do need a whole another job in general. And I think just as parents, knowing it's okay too, and knowing that like something could have been a good fit for your child in kindergarten might not be a good fit for your child in fifth grade, you know, like even those things, that it's okay. And sometimes it is just a teacher experience, you know, and so I think you're always trying to isolate, like, okay, is this a bad year, or am I seeing a trend of like second grade was hard, third grade was hard, fourth grade were hard, you know, like then you're looking at like, okay, this is a trend. And then also like how responsive is the school, you know, because you could have a teacher that's not a good fit, but then the school is doing things to try to advocate, such as like, okay, we're going to have the DEI person really work with you and your family, or, you know, we're going to, the guidance counselor is going to pull out your child once a week just to try to check on them or have meetings with you. And so in those situations, it seems fixable, right? Like you have this like active plan that is going, you have check-in systems, and then other times, if after the check-ins or unwillingness to check in, then it's like, okay, this may not be fixable, and I may want to start looking at other options for my child.
Because it sounds like what you're really saying is finding a place where you have a partnership with the teachers and the administration. Because I think sometimes we say, you know, it takes a village, but we forget that the village is a lot of different people, you know, and they're all working together. And if you find yourself in a village where you're the only one working towards one thing, that may not be your village. But if you go and there's a lot of opportunity for frank discussions where there's room for everybody to grow, because again, you may grow into an environment also. Coming into an environment like that where she was the only child of color in the entire grade, that's a big adjustment to make, because
right.
because you look around and you're like, what is going on, you know? And it's so interesting how, you know, at a young age, kids start to see that they're different. And I always kind of wonder a little bit, like, if she's seeing herself as different in that environment, what are the things that are happening in that environment to make her feel different, you know? And it may not be negative things, you know. I'm not necessarily saying like people are picking on her or things like that, but, you know, I think that's also something to be mindful of. You know, if we had one child, we actually had two children who were Muslim in our community. And we had, we always do a Christmas play. And I know in some places, you know, holidays and things are taboo. I love Christmas, and you're going to have to fight tooth and nail to stop watching Charlie Brown's Christmas and A Christmas Carol a million times.
Right, with the little tree on Charlie Brown.
Every year. I literally watch it every year. And I have seen every version of A Christmas Carol, from Muppets to Vanessa Williams to, I mean, you name it, I have seen it. So we had these two Muslim families. And so I just pulled them aside and said, we're doing a lot of Christmas stuff, but I know, you know, you may not, or I don't know if you celebrate Christmas. Would you feel comfortable? What do you celebrate? How can we include you? Because I mean, I don't think I want to alienate literally 93%, 97, 98% of the population. But at the same time, I don't want those other people to feel bad. And, you know, sometimes we get in that rush to make everybody happy, and it ends up making everybody miserable or causing a lot more discomfort than need be. So, you know, what we can, I think we as administrators and teachers can do a lot to validate everybody's experience so that nobody feels like an outsider. But a lot of times teachers are nervous about doing that, you know?
Right, right. And I think her most successful experience with a non Black educator was actually from a teacher that did just that. Like that teacher genuinely was trying to get to know her outside of a student, right? And just to get to know her personality and realizing like, oh my gosh, you do musical theater. Like I love musical theater too, and trying to build those connections. And I really saw her flourish even more academically and become more confident in herself and being able to exhibit her strengths as a student. And so I think, especially in a time period where I feel like even before COVID, right? Like teachers felt overwhelmed and, you know, depending on the type of school that you're at, you're preparing for standardized testing and all of those things. I think somewhere in lost in translation was just how important it was to build relationships. And I feel like we're trying to make up for the lack of building relationships through saying, let's have social emotional learning time. And I'm like, relationships is social emotional learning time. Like if we have to have a specific time for social emotional learning, then I think we as educators and administrators have to ask ourselves, where's the breakdown in our ability to build relationships? Because the more we build relationships, then we are nurturing kids emotionally. Like we can see like something was off with her today. Like, you know, like what was up with him today? Like I noticed his disposition was different on the playground. Like even that, like I think because educators are really overworked right now, like even something as small as watching what kids are doing on the playground doesn't quite happen because sometimes as educators we might need a break. You know, I'll speak from the I perspective. Like there was times when I was teaching fifth grade that like recess time was a break for me too. I'm like, yes, we're out sigh. I could catch my breath, you know,
Yes.
before get ready to do the math lesson. But really, so much of those interpersonal skills and interactions for kids really is really happening on the playground. Like those are when that's the time when they're getting those messages about like I'm different or it's okay to be different. Like from little conversations about like how do you wash your hair or I don't know, I like to play soccer. Do you or am I going to include you in this game or not? And so I wish I could like just encourage educators to slow down to be able to make those observations and to let parents know that it's okay to push educators to make those observations too.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the things that we do at Oak Tree Learning Center in San Bernardino is that we spend a vast majority of our time outside because you have to share, you have to take turns, you have to come up with games, you have to include people, you have to tell people they can't play with you, you have to follow directions, you have to look after yourself. So you get all of this like really condensed opportunity to have those conflicts in a healthy way that unfortunately, because there's such a drive and such a push for tests and test scores, that children do not spend enough time outside having those organic conflicts that then parents or I'm sorry, teachers are there to mitigate. And then they go home and their lives are booked up from this moment all the way to that moment with carefully curated play groups, you know, and if there's any sign of someone not getting along, then in come the parents to help them negotiate that. And then we have to build a whole nother curriculum. If we just stood back and let this stuff happen organically, there's no curriculum needed. You know, you don't have to teach kids. Like if you've ever been to a park with a child, they will go and make friends, or they'll go and ask kids if they want to play and get rejected.
Right,
You know?
right.
That happens so organically, you know, and how often do we, you know, we like a boy and he's like, nah, I'm good. Or, you know, we have a friend that we want to make and they're like super clingy. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm suffocated. Like you don't have the tools to deal with any of that if you don't have the opportunity to negotiate relationships with people, you know. You
Yeah,
know,
and we're really not giving students the chance to negotiate relationships. What I noticed at the school I was working at before as a classroom teacher was a rise in recommendations for kids to join play circles, which is for people who don't know what a play circle is, it's when you have like a therapist or a guidance counselor and there's like a group of kids, maybe 5 or so, and they like put them together to learn how to socialize. And so to your point, it's like, okay, how can we as parents help too? Because even when I think about my daughter's story, some of it, like, yeah, when she's younger, I do need to be the advocate, but as she's younger, I have to start helping her transition on how to be a self advocate. Like now, as a 6th grader, like I shouldn't go in and say like, you know, my daughter's feeling excluded unless it was extreme, you know, like she really needs to like have an active role in that. And I think to your point, like having that downtime is something that we're really missing in school, because then I think we would really pick up on those settledness of like, okay, is this kid shy? Is it that this kid is feeling different? Does this kid have the skills needed to integrate? Do the other kids have the skill needed to integrate someone? Like all of those things are important, but if our schedules are so jam packed where it's like I do reading instruction for an hour and a half and then math for an hour and a half and oops, let's try to put in social studies and then in the art, at what point do the kids have downtime?
Yeah, I mean,
so I think what this was beautiful.
yeah. Well, what's interesting is I described our schedule to another preschool teacher who works in a more I think it's like a state preschool or like definitely a more prescriptive structure, because I mean, it's my school. We can do whatever I want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we all sit around, the teachers collectively with me, and we kind of construct, this is what the day is going to look like. And I'm describing our schedule and she's like, why do you stay outside so much? And she said, how do you get your curriculum done? And I was like, we do project-based learning, or I actually call it experience-based learning, because they contribute, so for example, we had back to school night yesterday, and we wanted to make sure that the kids understood where their class was and who, like this is our first month of school, this, August to September. And, for a little people, we wanted them to have a better sense of me and identity. And then for some of the bigger kids, we wanted them to like start to look out and have a better sense of like, these are people in my community. These are other friends of mine. So they put up things that represented themselves. And when parents came in for back to school night, they were able to look at, all of the things that were on the wall that represented themselves. And so I'm describing this to another person and she's like, well, how do they learn their numbers? And I was like, well, when we have cupcakes and it's someone's birthday, they count how many of them there are and how many cupcakes to make sure that everybody has one. So we put it like into a context where it's not like the separate thing. We don't have math or social emotional, or it's all integrated. And a lot of times when people push back and say, well, you have to do foundations, you have to do whatever. And I was like, tell me the last day that you mathed all day.
Right. Like I don't go in my job, I don't say, okay, let me put on my math brain now. Let me pause. Let me put on my writing brain. All of those things are integrated. And I think that's where teacher education programs can really be strengthened. Like for me, I think it was a blessing in disguise. I didn't realize it at the time when I was at Ohio State. They have, I think it's Reggio Emilia school, but like it's a learning school. And so they would have all these observation desks.
Like a lab.
And we would have to like just sit, a lab school. They had a lab school and we would have to just sit and make observations all day and then talk about what we got from those observations. And at the time I was just like, what? I'm just trying to be an educator. Why they got me in here watching these kids for like a 3-hour segment,
I hate it. I will tell you, I was like, this is so boring. Can I do something?
Right. Like, can I do something? But now I can see how what you're doing makes sense, because I had to spend so much time looking at like observing kids, seeing how what you learn about what they're doing in their play can just be easily integrated into the classroom, that I don't have to create the units on my own. If they're pretending to be dinosaurs for the last 2 days, clearly they want to learn about dinosaurs, and we need to read and do sight words anyway. So why don't I start putting out some dinosaur books? Like, and we can count how many dinosaurs, and we can build a dinosaur village, and that experiential stuff that you're saying. And it is like this mindset shift that educators really have to make to be able to know that you can meet the needs of students without doing what you said, like, okay, turn off your writing brain, let's turn on our math brain.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's interesting. We were both trained as teachers in Ohio because I went to Wittenberg right down the street. And I remember it, first of all, we had, what was it? Child Development 101 and 102.
Mm-hmm.
And
Same here.
101 was like all book stuff. And then once we got to Child Development 102, that was the first class of the rest of my career where almost half of the class time was spent in a classroom. So you would have class, you know, let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, but you would go to a school Tuesday and Thursday. And every class, you were in a classroom making those observations. And if you think about the amount of time that teachers have to look at what each other are doing, it's like that doesn't even exist once you get in the classroom. Yeah. And then on top of that, I remember my junior year, you know, you get your syllabus and it has like a list of things and it said buy 500 index cards. And I was like, that sounds like a lot of index cards. So you had to buy like 250 packs of index cards. And our task was to put a different lesson and strategy idea on each one of those cards before the end of the quarter. And even though it's like rapid fire, what happens now is I look at a situation, I can immediately come up with a viable lesson plan. You know, it's like reflex, you know. And I don't think that teachers have that reflex because the programs don't foster that. And then you have parents who, I mean, you're in private school, so I would imagine it's even more where there's, you know, it's all rainbows and bunnies until they get to like 8th grade. And then they're like, but they got to go to college, you know.
Right. Be
gentle and kind. But now you got to, you know, buckle down and do 9 hours of homework, right. You know, and there's no transition. It's like kids are like blindsided. And so it's like all this pressure from all these sides, you know, where you really and truly don't get that opportunity for reflection. And going back to your daughter's situation, how well trained have her teachers been in the practice of letting class organically happen so they can do observations and then enter a conversation with you about how to best serve her? And the answer is probably very few.
Right, right. And like if you put on top of like being culturally responsive, on top of making observations, like I feel like it's twofold, because I think some teachers are good at making observations, but they're not good at having the equity lens while they're making observations, you know. And it's so funny because like I have posted that right up on Facebook, and I'm friends on there with my daughter's teacher that she had at 4.5, and she read it and she was just like, oh my gosh, like this is exactly what happened. And she's like, now reading this, it makes so much more sense. And she started being reflective. She's like, you know, like, do you have any suggestions on what I could have done better? And I, you know, like, and at that time period, like I thought she was the best teacher she could be. And I still think the world of her as an educator. But I think those are the questions, like, can we as educators humble ourselves? You know, like I felt like, wow, like for this teacher to reach out and see this, like, and say like, what could I have done better? Even though at that time she was doing like above and beyond for, you know, like where she was at as an educator, where I was at as a parent, like I couldn't articulate what was going on, you know, like we both was trying our best.
Yeah.
But it's like, we need those moments of self-reflection, like you're saying, like to humble ourselves and say like, is this me? Is it the kid? Like, I feel like that was a really important lesson that I've learned in one of my courses. Was the teacher said like, you have to give yourself pause enough to say, is this a me problem or is this the kid problem? You know, like even things like with discipline, with academic choices, because sometimes it could be you projecting what you think it means to be a good student. And if all of our programs now, they're so fast paced. Like when I think about like my training as an educator, it started with my human development courses like you. I mean, I felt like it was like a 6 year long process of like learning to be an educator. It was like so long. Grad school was another
Oh
2 years.
my God, it was a slog.
It was so long. And now I hear about people who go through processes and they're like, my graduate program was only a year. And I'm like, how? How did you do all of this in a year? Like, how did you make observations? Like, not observe to take over, but just for the sake of observing, listening to other people's experiences. Like, there's no way you can do that in a year, you
No,
know?
no. I mean, and I think, that's helpful for parents to know also going in, because so I can, quickly tell you this story. We have a child who is doing distance learning at my center, because we have a preschool for kids 2 to 5, and then we have a school age program. And usually that's for school breaks, and then we drop them off at school and then come back and pick them up. But now they're with us all day. So we have a kid who has a teacher, and she's like, he's not on, he's missing assignment, he's doing this, he's doing that, he's doing the other thing. And mom is getting really riled up. So I looked at what the teacher had typed, and I said, Mom, I think the approach you might want to take is, how can we together manage this technology? Because I don't think this teacher is really struggling with your son. I think she's really struggling with the technology. But I guarantee if that teacher had said in an email and just wrote to parents, I'm really struggling with this technology, those parents would have called the principal and had a fit.
Right.
We don't have
She's
that
incompetent. This teacher is incompetent. And
yeah. And I think a lot of times we have to remember, when we go charging into our classrooms, the teachers, no teacher is perfect. I've been teaching, I literally have a little certificate somewhere that says I'm a master teacher. The state has agreed that I am a master, that I float when I teach. And I still feel like I'm constantly learning. Like, I have a basket full of educational magazines that I subscribe to. I read voraciously about how to be a better teacher, how to be a better facilitator. And I've been teaching for many, many years, but we don't necessarily have that compassion. And I also can say that teachers don't necessarily have the humility to say, I really need help and I'm really struggling. Because when I hear about how frustrated and how overworked teachers are, that's what I hear is, I'm frustrated and I don't know how to do this. And they don't have those words. So they're, saying something that gets people mad at them instead.
right. Yeah. And it's like, I feel like now that I've transitioned to being an administrator, I'm trying to figure out, like, how do I make that space okay? Because it is really important to do that. Because I think about, like, for myself, there was definitely moments where it's just like, I need help. But the fear is, if I say I need help, will someone take that as I don't know how to teach? And then if I say I need help, or if you had an experience where you said I need help, and then, like what so many of our students feel sometimes is that there's no plan of action, or someone says they're going to do it, but then there's no follow through, and then they're left to figure it out. I think sometimes we forget that sometimes some of these teachers are left to figure it out too, like depending
Yes.
on the administration and stuff that they have. And so I feel like that's something I've been really trying to be aware of. Is like, okay, what was it like when I was a teacher? How can I help them feel seen and heard and supported? How can I make sure that I'm executing what I'm going to say I'm going to do, and make sure that I'm also not overextending myself, because then that lets them down as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're further along as an administrator than when I was new, because I can admit I claim my mistakes. Like, I was difficult and I was super demanding until I took a course on mentoring or something, and it totally shifted how I approached interactions with my teachers, because I was in an environment where it was very much like, you have to do this and, be right. And I fell into that. And it wasn't until I stepped away from that and said, this, first of all, that's not necessarily my personality. I can be bossy and whatever, but just like anybody else, but that's not like my go-to. And You know, I remember I took, I was in charge of some department heads and I took them to lunch and I apologized. I was like, I've been like really pushy and kind of obnoxious. And I know that this past year has been difficult and I didn't make it easier.
Mm,
So when I said that, then they felt like, well, if you're coming out with that, here's all my mistakes, you know. And I feel like a lot of times if we're all just really honest in saying that we need help, you know, you won't have it. And that trickles down to, and because I keep going back to your daughter in that class, I'm sure that teacher looked out and said, I have this one little girl in my class, and I don't know. First off, I don't want to say something wrong. I don't want to tell her
right.
mom I don't know what to do. I don't want to admit, you know, I can imagine some of the things that would have gone through that teacher's head, you know, and instead of being in an environment where it's safe to have a space, you know, have someone to talk to, or to be able to build a relationship, to just be honest and say, your daughter is the only child of color in this grade. What can we do to support her? Because I have no idea, you
Right.
know?
Right. No, and I think you're so right. Like, I haven't had that chance yet to be able to say like, I've done this wrong. I'm sure it's coming as an administrator because I'm still like really early in, but I remember doing that with a class I had because I think like my thing that I had to work on as a teacher was like classroom management. I had to figure that out, and going back to boundaries, like thinking about like if you don't have your boundaries set as a teacher, the kids will cross and cross and cross. They're like, what? No boundaries? Here we come. You know? Hey y'all, she ain't got no boundaries, you know. And so, but as a teacher, what would happen is like you get frustrated, right? Like, and I never really like yelled at kids, but I think yelling came out in different ways, you know, in terms of like my patience level or frustration level or being like, I don't understand why you don't get this, as opposed to looking at like, well, you don't have any boundaries, like so they don't even know what they're supposed to be doing when.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first time that like I had admitted that to a class, like, listen, like I realized that I need to do better. I haven't really been really patient, and that was inappropriate. And I could see them be a little bit more like, huh, all right, you know, and they were willing to kind of help me, like, we're gonna help you have some boundaries then. Like,
That's hilarious. They're like, we got you. We see that you're trying.
yeah, yeah. And I think, yeah, like how do we create that in schools, you know, like, and that it's okay to admit if you need help, and how do we support parents to really support teachers in that, because I feel like that's what we're seeing right now with COVID. Like we're seeing a lot of teachers that are saying it without saying like I need help, and then we're seeing a lot of parents like generalizing on social media, not all, where you see some parents saying like these teachers don't get it. I had to figure out my job. Why can't they figure it out? Um, and like how do we become the village that you spoke of before? Like we really need a village. Teachers can't do it all, parents can't do it all. We really have to work together.
Well, you know, as interesting as, see, here's that lesson plan, right? Like that, oh, I got an idea. You know, as the person who does diversity and inclusion, maybe even having a forum where you invite teachers, parents, and students to talk about how difficult navigating the technology is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can do it in a couple of ways where people submit questions beforehand, or where everyone's invited to use the chat and you just talk about problems people are having with the technology, because then you normalize the failure. We're all coming because we are terrible at this. Let's talk about it.
Right. Let's talk about it. Let's meet
Yeah.
in the middle.
You know, and if everybody is contributing their failure and everybody is helping, then there's your village. And especially when you can say, well, you know, we really want people who have limited access to the internet or who don't have a lot of experience with the internet, because I look at that as a huge diversity issue.
It is.
I have, and I get it from both ends. I have an aunt who's rather affluent, but she can't use technology to save her life. And she's no better off than the kids in my school whose parents don't have Wi-Fi.
Right.
Both living so far out of where we live because we are connected digitally. They're completely ignorant to, I would say, somewhere in the realm of 60 to 80% of the information that we have because we have devices and we just take for granted we can scroll through or look it up on Google or whatever, but they are completely excluded. So again, you know, having that conversation and go from the beginning of like, this is maybe an equity issue all the way to it's an equity issue because we don't have the same skill set and the same acuity with this. How can we help and support and uplift each other in this? You know, I would go to that.
Right. No, and I think that's where COVID-19 has actually been helpful for schools. To your point about like, we have a society where kids tend to be overscheduled, where parents and families tend to be overscheduled. And with so many things shut down, it has provided this unique space to be able to have more conversations. Like even this one, like we're having today, like we wouldn't have been able to have this conversation if everyone wasn't forced on Zoom. And now we're connecting with people in the same city, in the same state, and cross culture, like coastal and all of those things. And so, yeah, I think having more conversations is a great idea. I think even giving teachers the opportunity to have more conversations. I think at schools, we tend to have a lot of meetings. And it's like, okay, what would happen if schools replace more meeting times with conversation time? Mm-hmm. Like I know we're doing that in our lower school at my school, which I thought was just so beautiful. Like they meet once a month, 4 times a month anyway, once a week. And so now it's like, okay, only one of those weeks per month is like the typical meeting. And then the others is like collaborative conversation time. Let's do a DEI check-in time. You know, like they have a lot more time to do, to have those conversations.
Well, I think that's, you know, you're right on point with just conversations and collaborations. You know, we are at the point where there's no excuse for anybody to be ignorant because you have so much information. And I will even call, you know, and say that people who may not have technology, because I know people would be like, oh, there's reasons why. Everybody can go somewhere and use a computer and have access to information. But how do you use that information? For me, that's where the issue lies, you know, and how do you know which information you need? We can know a million things. I can Google whatever I want with my phone or with my computer, but then how do I use that information? And we can only do that when we have conversations with each other and collaborate and build ideas and stuff.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about at your school. Like they have all this time to be outside. And so your teachers can get a lot of information. And then you have to create that space for them to talk about it, to say like, oh, okay, we're going to do this now with the observations that we've seen on the playground. Which I think is just, I think it's the beautiful thing of, or what can be really beautiful about education is that it is this communal space. But when I think about like, how things have shifted from when you were in the classroom, from when I was in the classroom, from when my aunt, this retired educator, when she was in the classroom, it was very different. Like the way she talks about teaching, like, I don't think she was ever stressed at all, like at one point, but she was also teaching. The end of her career would have been towards the beginning of like testing and stuff. Like my senior year of high school in Ohio was around the first time where like you had to pass the state test to graduate high school. Like there were people crying in the hallway that had 3.0s, but they couldn't pass the state test, you know? And so I just think about like educators have gone through all of those changes, you know, and pre-K is definitely a beautiful space because you have a little bit more freedom to be able to do that. And I think now in the high school world, we're really starting to push back. Like we're starting to see more and more schools say, I want to do the masteries transcript, or we want to get rid of APs because for whatever reason, you know, and what would it look like to have a ready lab or some type of space that would be equivalent to like when pre-K is outside, what would that look like for a high school student to like have time to just mess around, like figure things out in a more organic.
Exactly. Because I mean, having like that, like you said, if you had a free period, sometimes you would be highly productive, sometimes you would fart around. But, how will you know how to handle yourself in college if you never had to handle yourself, When you look at the graduation rate, my sons are athletes, and so we looked at graduation rates of places that they were considering going to school. And when I tell you, it is abysmal. It is there is clear evidence that people need less instructed, prescribed time and more time for all of the things that we're talking about, like building social and emotional awareness, self-control. I mean, there's a lot of people that just don't even have the self-control or the, what I call it, intellectual endurance to just sit down and stick through and with something. Like, it's pretty, the alarms are ringing, but we're not necessarily listening to them, which I find a little, yeah, I find it baffling. Because again, I'm not one to lean away or shy away from things that are difficult. It's just like, how do you fix it? And you can't avoid this.
No, you definitely can't avoid it. You can't avoid it at all. But I think we need to, one of the things that I realized is like trusting kids. Like we have to trust kids. Parents and teachers, they have to trust each other, because when we don't, that's when conflicts arise, and kids can feel that as well. I think what I'm getting out of our conversation is like creating those spaces to make mistakes. Like teachers need to be able to make mistakes, students need to be able to make mistakes, and really like reevaluating like how are we preparing teachers, like teachers are the people who prepare the doctors, and if we're accelerating their process because we need more teachers in the classroom, we're really setting those teachers up to fail. We're doing a really huge disservice to them. And I think that's where the frustration comes in for parents, because they feel like I'm receiving generic information about where my kid is academically or socially, emotionally. But it's because like they haven't had time to work that muscle. Like the fact that we had to spend all those hours making observations in that moment, it did not feel good at all. Like we weren't trying to do that, especially not in college. We're like, oh, there's this party going on. It's this.
I have such better things to do.
Now they have social media, like there's so much that you could do, but doing that like twice a week, like it built that muscle to it. Like you said, like you can make those lessons in your head. I can make like observations noted in my head now because it's so easy to do. And I can think about like what you were saying, like, okay, like I notice like such and such, every time they go outside, they stand there. But when they come inside, they complain about people not including them. Now I know I can ask them questions like, well, when you stand there, what are you saying? Like, oh, you thought your body would tell them you wanted to play. Well, sometimes that's not all that works. Like sometimes you have to use your words and your body. They may have thought you just wanted to talk, you just wanted to watch. And then helping them make those connections to get out there. But yeah, and that's actually like one of my favorite things to do now is just like watch what people are doing, like watch what the high school students are doing. And I think that will help us with those kids, like deciphering, like, is this shyness or is it acclimation? Am I asking kids to assimilate into this environment, or am I saying like, we accept you as you are? Like to your point with what was happening with the Muslim students, it's like, I'm not asking you to not be Muslim. I'm also not asking these students not to participate in Christianity or in the Christmas process. So let's talk about like honoring you and who you are while also honoring someone else.
I think we need to collaborate on a professional development.
Oh yes, let's do it. Let's do this. Let's do it.
Because I think that would be so cool. I'm actually working on a series of like little videos to kind of help folks with some of this stuff. But I mean, I think we should do a professional development. It would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I would love to. I would love to. Anything that's going to help teachers and educators and students, I'm off with it.
Yeah. I mean, and parents too, because again, parents have no idea, you only know what you experienced in school. And if that was great or terrible, that's what you think school is. And so how we can help them and throw them in the mix too.
No, we definitely need to. We definitely need to throw them in the mix because they need to know like the difference between like a teacher giving a prescribed, like this is where I think your kid is versus like this is really who my child is and how do you advocate for them? How do you get resources for your child? It's okay to say like, I would like this teacher, you know, all of those things because they're the child's first educator. So we definitely can't leave them out.
for sure. But so I just want to say thank you because I always try to be mindful of time, and I really appreciate you helping me with my second round. If this doesn't record, I'm going to throw the computer out the window.
No, I see the recording in the top, so I think we're good. If this was so great, I feel like every time we talk, I learn more about myself too, and it helps me. So.
Excellent. Well, same. I mean, I'm like, you know, thinking about things that are in a different way, in a different perspective. And I love like people who make me think. So I definitely appreciate the conversation.
Same. Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
So that's our conversation for today. I hope you found some information that was interesting or a perspective that you hadn't thought of. If you like what you heard, or even if you have some feedback, put a comment in our comment section. Be sure to like our page and make sure that you subscribe so that you can hear when the next video comes out. Thanks so much again for joining us.